Welcome to Zero Experience Required. Today we're going to be making a welcome sign that can be reversible, so both ways can say welcome. Ours is going to be a little bit special. It's a fall one, but I'm also going to make the backside be a Halloween theme that says go away. We're going to hang it on our front porch and on the screen door, so when you open the door to come in, it'll say welcome. When you shut the door, it will say go away. We thought it was pretty cute. My husband will make a little appearance in here, but this one's mostly for you ladies that want to be crafty. But you will see him cutting out the 4x4 squares that I need to make this out of wood, as woodworking is his forte. But we're excited to show you how to make this go away sign.
The first step is to cut some 1/4 inch plywood into 4x4 pieces. First, just rip it on a table saw, and then set up a miter saw. Make sure to set your stop block so it will not move, and then double check your cuts, and then proceed cutting through all of them. You'll want to stop the blade completely before lifting it up so it doesn't catch on the pieces and cause more tear out. Being in plywood, these pieces don't need much sanding, but you do have the tear out from your blades. No matter how fine the blades you get, you're going to have tear out. So I'm going to be just sanding the tear out from the miter saw. That's really all you need. This is 150 grit sandpaper. Do it to all of them. The reason to get rid of the tear out is 1, it causes splinters, and 2, it can make anything you can glue to it, including the paper, uneven.
Alright, welcome. So I'm going to start with the 4x4 pieces that my husband cut out for me on the saw. Now, if you don't have a handy husband who can cut out 4x4 pieces for you, or if you don't have the tools, you can purchase pieces of wood like this at Hobby Lobby. They're a little bit larger. The ones here near our home sold 4x4, 4.5 by 4.5 squares for $1.99 a piece. You could also try going to your local hardware store and seeing if they have a scrap piece of 1/4 inch plywood, and you might bat your eyelashes at them and see if they'll cut it down to 4x4 squares for you. They do charge 25 cents a cut usually, but it's probably cheaper than spending $1.99 per square. So it's totally up to you. Use whatever you can. But I used 4x4 squares. I find that they're easy to cut out because if I use a 12x12 piece of scrapbook paper, then I just make one 4-inch cut. It divides into thirds really easy. It just made sense to me. So we're going to start by cutting our 4x4 squares. Now, when I picked out my paper, I went to the store, put several pieces together to decide how I wanted it to look. I just use a giant guillotine because I really like having straight lines. If you don't have a giant paper cutter like this, you can absolutely use a ruler, measure it, draw it out, and cut it, but I find this saves a lot of time, saves a lot of money. I'll just quickly show you how to use it. I'm sure if you have a paper cutter you know how to use it, but just in case, we'll give you a little show. So I just line it up with a 4-inch line right here, so then I know this area will be 4 inches wide. And then I just rotate it and cut 4 inches. And 4 inches. So you get your squares, you'll find that they line up perfectly. So the next thing you have to do is decide a pattern for your squares. We'll do that next. So I've cut out all my paper squares, and you'll notice I made 7 squares. I actually cut out more than that, but by the time I decided what pattern I was going to lay out, this is what I ended up with. So you need 7 squares. I just kind of did a pattern where I have the orange chevron every other one to kind of make it a neat pattern. So I'll show you what to do from there. Now that I have my 7 squares cut out for the pattern that I want, I need to cut out the words welcome. Now, you have a couple choices on how to do that. You can either use a paper cutting machine like your Cricut or the Silhouette Cameo. Unfortunately, with the Cricut, I only have one font and I'm not very fond of it. So I just decided to cut out by hand. But you are welcome to use one of the other paper cutters to make your life a little easier. I'm going to show you a trick on cutting out papers though that will save you a lot of time. If you want to make a sign that's reversible that says welcome on both sides, maybe you would do a fall theme and a winter theme, then you could just do welcome 2 times instead of once. This one is going to be a fall theme that it's going to be winter or fall and Halloween. So one side is going to say welcome, one side is going to say go away. But you can make it differently so where both sides say welcome. But let me show you a trick to how to cut out 2 sets of the word welcome without a lot of work. Another thing we're going to do is instead of the O in the welcome, we're going to put a shape. For our fall theme, we're going to put a pumpkin. For winter, I was planning on putting in a snowflake or an ornament, something like that. So you have choices of what you want to do. On my spring one, I put a flower, and on my summer one, I put a sun instead of the O. So you have a lot of choices of what you want to do to decorate your welcome sign. So today we're going to do a pumpkin as the O, and I'm going to show you how to cut out the rest of the letters really easily. So what I did was I went on the computer and I picked a font that I liked. Now there's a couple things you need to be mindful of when you pick a font on the computer. First of all, you need to make sure that the full letter is going to fit on your 4x4 square. You can do that by, if you type it up in Word, look on the ruler on the side and make sure it's smaller than 4 inches tall. I also just kind of hold up a piece of paper behind it so I can see, yeah, it looks like that whole letter is going to fit on there. I don't know if you can see the paper shining through, but when I look at it, I can see that the whole letter is going to fit on that piece of paper and it's not going to spill off. I have had where, especially on the go away part, where I tried to cut out letters and the Y, because it has a tail on it, hung down over the 4 inches, so I had to redo it. So just be mindful when you're picking out your fonts that all of the letters fit on there the entire way, especially like the W is a large letter. You want to make sure it's going to fit in this 4-inch space. So my trick to cut it out, I learned from Martha Stewart a million years ago. And I just start by cutting out the letters, just kind of close, not too close, but, you know, ½ an inch from the edge. And you'll notice I didn't spell out welcome. I left out the O because we're going to make the pumpkin the O, so I don't need to cut out that letter. Now here's the best trick I've ever learned. And I use this all the time in my preschool for cutting out letters for bulletin boards. I just kind of line this up so I kind of see how much it's going to take off. Then I'm just going to cut out the piece of scrapbook paper that I need, the size I need. You can do any color you want to. I just like black letters because I want to be able to read it from a distance. We are going to cut this out 2 times because we want 2 sets of these letters. So I'm going to do the same thing again. Just cut out another piece. It's the same size as this. And this is where it's really helpful with 2 pieces. I don't know if you've ever tried to cut something by just holding the paper in front of it and the paper kind of slides around and then you lose where you were. If you want really crisp, nice letters, stapling it is the way to go. You just kind of staple on the outside of the letter. Kind of all throughout. I especially like to put staples in the middle of complicated areas because that way when you go to cut it out, it will keep the paper from slipping. So I just do several staples all around. It doesn't matter how many staples you use. It's not going to show up in the final thing unless you accidentally put a staple on the actual letter. Then you'll have a hole in the letter you cut out. So you want to be careful and not do that. This is how you cut it out. You staple it together as close as you can and then start cutting it out. Let me just tell you, the best method for cutting out letters is to go slow and steady. If you put your scissors all the way at the end and Just go slow around the curves, slow on the straight lines. You will have straighter letters that will look like they were cut out of a machine instead of cut by hand. You want that look where it looks really crisp and clean. So I'm just going to show you kind of how to do that so that you can see. I usually just chop off one of the letters so I can do one at a time, but as you see, it's all stapled together so my paper won't move as I start trying to cut it out. Go really slow around the curves. Do your best work. You always want to make sure that when you're doing a project, you're doing your best. When I'm all finished cutting this letter out, the letters from the scrapbook paper will just fall free, and then the excess pieces will stay stapled together. So there you have it, 2 perfectly cut out letter L's. I'm going to cut out the rest of the letters and then I'll come back to you. Alright, so here is just me kind of laying out what my welcome sign is going to look like. So I have the papers with the letters that I cut out laid on top of them, and I have the front side, which is going to say welcome, and the back side, which is going to say go away. You'll notice that go away only needs 6 letter spaces, so to fill in the 7th, I put a little ghost. On the welcome, I've left the O space empty so I can show you how we're going to cut out that pumpkin. If you notice in the left corner on the Y for the go away, I kind of showed you how I messed that up just so you can see to know, kind of get a visual of what I was telling you. The Y on the left that's on the table is the one that was the same size font as the rest of the letters, but it was too long to fit on the paper. It hung over by about 1 inch, and I decided I didn't want it to look that way. So I made the font a little smaller, and then when I printed it out, I just kind of beefed it up and made it a little bit fatter so it would be closer to the same size as everything else. Alright, I want to try and show you a little closer how I cut things out and why the staples are so important. So you'll see this is where the staple is for this pumpkin that we're going to cut out. But I already stapled it to a piece of orange paper, but I want to do something special with this. I also want to make the stem green, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. And I don't want to cut out an entire piece of pumpkin just to get the stem. So I'm going to staple a piece of green paper just to the stem section and staple it together so I can cut out the stem and not waste a lot of energy cutting out an entire pumpkin 2 times and waste a lot of paper. I'm going to cut off this extra green paper that I don't need. And look, I didn't have to waste the whole sheet, I just used a little bit. So, let me cut out this pumpkin for you so you can see that's kind of what the back looks like. This is where the stem is going to be, so that way I'm not wasting paper. When you get to these corners, what I like to do is kind of go up to the corner and stop, and then approach it from the other direction so that it's nice and crisp in the corner over there. So I'll just come approach it from the top this way. It is a little harder when you come this way because you can't see the line as clearly, but you perfectly pull out that piece. You have a nice crisp corner there. Everything looks great. And see how the green paper didn't come off, but it is going to align perfectly with this pumpkin. So all I have to do is cut out this piece right here to make the tip or the stem for my pumpkin. Alright, so I'm going to take my stem and just kind of cut it off like that. Just that way it'll fit perfectly on the pumpkin, and then I'll just use some scrapbooking glue to glue that on just to make it look a little cute. I'm also going to use a Sharpie and kind of draw some pumpkin lines on here just so it looks a little bit more like a pumpkin and somebody doesn't say, oh, that looks like a tomato. So now we're going to glue all of our pieces together so that we can finally put this together to hang it up outside. So I glued my stem to my pumpkin, and I drew some little lines on here to make it look more like a pumpkin. I'm just going to kind of set it here so you know where we're going to put it. That one spells out welcome, this one spells out go away. Now when I'm using glue to put things together, I like using this Elmer's Craft Bond because it's acid free. If you use regular glue sticks, you may find that it discolors the paper a little bit. Scrapbook paper is meant to be used with acid-free glues, so if you have scrapbooking paper glue, that's your best bet. If you don't have it, you absolutely can use any other type of glue. It just may not come out as nice, or it may discolor your paper. So I'm just going to put a little glue on each letter and glue it down kind of in the center of each square. You want to put enough glue on it that it will stick firmly to the paper so that no Mod Podge will get underneath it. Your Mod Podge is going to kind of weatherproof it for outside because I'm going to hang mine on my screen door. Now it will still be indoors mostly because my screen door will shut. You'll see when you're coming in the welcome and when you're leaving the go away, so it will still be inside, but I just want to kind of protect it from the elements a little bit, and you'll especially want to do that if you're planning on hanging it outside. So I'm just going to glue all these letters on. You'll probably want to use a piece of paper when you're doing the glue just so you don't get your work surface all gluey and you don't get your hands all sticky. So just use your glue stick, apply it generously to all the letters, and then stick them on. Once you have all your letters glued on, we are going to glue them to our squares. I am going to do a little bit of an experiment to kind of see. I don't think that the Sharpie should run on this, but it is a kind of vellum paper with cotton threads in it. I mean, it's just really thin. So I am just going to take a sample from the piece that I cut off, write on it with Sharpie, and go over it with Mod Podge to make sure that it's not going to run. If it's not going to run, then I will use my glue stick to glue it down, and then I'll Mod Podge over the whole thing. If that doesn't work well, then I'm going to Mod Podge just the plain piece of paper. After it dries, then I will glue this on top so that it doesn't get Mod Podge on it. We're just going to do an experiment, see what happens. Okay, for the next part you're going to use Mod Podge. If you have never used Mod Podge before, it's basically just a glue, but it's also a sealer, and it kind of helps keep the elements out. Obviously, if you leave your welcome sign in the rain, it's going to get ruined. Okay, this doesn't make it waterproof, but it will kind of protect it in case you get splashes on it, something like that. Now, you can buy Mod Podge at your local hobby store or at Walmart. It's pretty much available anywhere. I like to just use the matte, but they have matte, they have glossy, they have glitter, they have all sorts of finishes. I like the matte just because it doesn't detract from what I'm trying to do, but you are welcome to choose whatever type you like. So I just use a little foam brush that I got at the hobby store to paint a little bit of this Mod Podge on my wooden squares. From there, I'm going to paint glue on one side, then I'm going to take my letter and glue it straight on there and put it on the side and let it dry for a little bit. I'm going to put all the letters for one side down and let it dry. Then I'm going to go over it with another layer of Mod Podge over the top of the paper to waterproof the top of the paper. Or to protect the top of the paper, not waterproof it. Then you have to let that dry completely before we go to the next step. So don't get impatient. Don't try putting both sides on at once because it won't work. There's a step in between putting one side of the paper on and then putting the other side on. So be patient, put it on, let it dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. I also like to put down a piece of parchment paper or wax paper just to make sure my surface doesn't get glue on it. Now you'll notice I went back and smoothed some of these out. The Mod Podge can cause your paper to wrinkle a little bit, and if you're not careful, then you end up with a wrinkle in your paper when you're finished. You want to make sure as you're laying them out to kind of smooth them out so there's no lumps. Otherwise, you could get some crinkles in your paper or some lumps in your paper. You just want to make sure you smooth it out as smooth as possible. That's also why we want to let it dry before we put on our next coat. So here's my ghost experiment. I'm just going to take a piece of the same paper that I used to make the ghost, draw on it with a Sharpie, blow on it, and then try rubbing some Mod Podge on it and see what happens. This Mod Podge stuff lasts forever. I think I've had this bottle 2 or 3 years and it still works great for all the projects that I have. So don't be afraid of buying a big bottle, because if you're a crafter you will use it eventually. Alright, so I put Mod Podge on there. There's no bleeding, there's no anything, so it looks great. I will Mod Podge my ghost onto my paper. I let my papers dry, and now I'm going to Mod Podge the top layer. So before I do that, I'm going to glue my ghost on. I haven't glued my ghost on yet. I also noticed when I was putting the Mod Podge on that it looked like there were little fibers that were coming off of my brush into the Mod Podge. You do want to be mindful of that if you use a brush or a foam sponge like I did. I got mine brand new out of the package, but it just seemed like there were some little fibers on there that were coming off. So I went ahead and washed my brush to get rid of those fibers, because if you brush it on to the top coat and there's little fibers on it, you're going to see it in your finished product. You want to make sure that your brushes are clean so that whatever you brush on is what you're going to be stuck with permanently. You don't want to redo it if you don't have to. So now I'm just going to Mod Podge over the top of all of these and then let them dry. Now, one thing that is important with your strokes, you do want to make nice, neat strokes with this, because it does dry and you do sort of see the pattern, so you don't want to just kind of brush all over the place with it. Just do a nice straight lines across. I usually do 2 coats on top. Another thing is, when you're putting this top coat on, you might notice a little bit of bubbling underneath your paper. Like it'll bubble up a little bit again like it did underneath or when we first put it on. It's really hard, but ignore it. Usually it dries flat if it bubbles up at this stage. So try really hard to ignore it, because it usually will correct itself as it dries. So there's a tip for you. Okay, once you have your letters glued to one side, we're going to be gluing on the ribbon to hold them together and make them connect. So I've tried it a couple of different ways. This is the best way that I've found out. I cut out a 1-inch strip of construction paper or scrapbooking paper, and then I just drew a little line the same distance away from the edge on each side, so that I can kind of know where to put the line of glue. And what I'm going to do is just kind of put the squares like this and put the piece of paper in between them, so that way I have consistent spacing all the way through. Just make sure when you lay your letters out that you have the letters in order and the right orientation, so you don't have them upside down or something like that. So let me just show you how I'm going to glue on the ribbon. This is the best method. I've tried it 2 or 3 times. This is the best result that I've gotten. So I'm going to start by just kind of laying it out to kind of estimate how much ribbon I need. So I just kind of start here, put my spacer in, put down the block, put my spacer in, put in a block, etc. all the way till I have all 7 pieces laid out. Okay, now I'm going to take my ribbon and give me kind of a general, it'll give me a general estimate of how long I need the ribbon to be. I need the ribbon to go from the bottom to the top, loop around, and then come all the way back down again. So I'm just going to cut out the how much ribbon I need by just kind of laying it on top and just kind of eyeballing it a little bit. I'll make sure to give myself plenty of extra. You don't need a huge loop up here at the top. About 2 inches of loop is plenty. So just give yourself about 2 inches of loop there. And so I'm just going to make a cut down here so that I know that's about how much ribbon I need to make my welcome sign work. Now, what I've discovered is that it's really easy to get it crooked and then your sign hangs funny. So the best thing is to start from the top where your loop is and work down to the bottom. So I just kind of move this out of the way, stack these back up so they end in order. And then just start with the first 2. I put my spacer there. Find the middle. It's also important to make sure if you're using a patterned ribbon like this, it's black on one side and golden black on the other side, that you just lay the pattern side up on both sides. I just kind of found the center, have it sticking up at about 2 inches, and then I'm going to line them up with these lines that I drew on this little scrap paper that I'm using as a spacer. I'm just going to hot glue these down. When I hot glue it, you need to make sure you spread the hot glue out, otherwise you're going to get a lump in there, and then when you glue your next sheet of paper on here, you're going to see the lump in it. So you want to get it as flat as possible, and then you just glue all the way down. What's nice about starting this direction is you can kind of flip the ribbon over and then just do half of it at a time, and that way you get it really straight. If you mess up, like I made this one over a little bit too far, you can just peel it right off. That's what's nice about using hot glue. Just peel it right off. Start over again. Not a problem at all. That's why it's important to look at your guide that you have on your spacer to kind of know where to put the glue to start. That way it's straight all the way down. You don't have to do anything fancy with the end pieces for the ribbon because you're going to be covering this up with more paper. So just make sure it's glued down, everything's straight. I also like to go back to the very top, and where I put it on, there's a little bit of gap here. I just want to make sure there's hot glue all the way to the top because this is going to be my anchor point where everything's hanging. I want to make sure there's enough glue to keep it strong. So we're going to glue on the second side, and just a reminder, make sure that you start and have your letters in order. So the top part with the loop is the top, so that's where your W is going to go, and this one at the end is the E, that's where you're, for welcome. So make sure you're spelling out welcome the right way so that it will be right side up. Before you put your final layers of Mod Podge over the top, make sure that everything is spelled correctly and that your letters are going the same way, because I just noticed that I glued my M on backwards, and so I'm going to have to peel that off and try again. I've covered both sides of my welcome and go away sign with Mod Podge. I just wanted to give you a tip about storage. So when you want to put these away for the season, I would recommend getting a piece of wax paper and putting it in between each layer, and then just kind of folding it up like this. Makes it neat and tidy, doesn't take up much space, but if you put the layers together just like they are, The Mod Podge has a tendency to stick to the other side and it will ruin your project. So put a piece of wax paper or a piece of parchment paper in between there so that your project doesn't get ruined. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to make the welcome and go away sign. This is something new we haven't tried at Zero Experience Required. Usually my husband does car videos and woodworking videos, but he helps me a lot with crafting things with his woodworking skills. If you like this and you want to see more crafting ideas, please leave us a comment in this section below so that we will know that you enjoyed this. And also if you have any suggestions of what you'd like to see us do. And subscribe. We love having new subscribers to his channel. And we thank you for watching us. Have a great day.